Excellent. Thanks, Brian. Oh, that's good. Oh, good. My lapel mic works. I just realized earlier when standing up here, hey, I forgot to put my lapel mic on. It's one of those funny things you don't think about until you get up here. But that is so good. Good morning. Once again, my name is Johnny. If I didn't get a chance to say hello to you this morning, hello and good morning. And thank you for being here with us this morning to worship and hear from God's Word. And a big thank you for all the birthday gifts and cards that I received last week. I really do appreciate it. I feel very loved here being lead pastor and really enjoy that, and I thank you very much for that. And on my birthday, which was Thursday night, we had something kind of neat here. There was a church that was here, a Calvary Chapel church that was before the Wesleyan Church, from about 95 to about 2000, 2001, somewhere in that range. And their old pastor was up here, and I had offered him months ago, if he ever comes up and they want to do a reunion, that they were more than welcome to use our building. And so he called me up a few months ago and said, hey, I'm coming up for my daughter's graduation. I'd really like to get everybody together. And I was like, sure, let's do it. And this church was a biker church, okay? So like I saw the photos, this parking lot used to be full of motorcycles and stuff, and I was like, this is going to be really neat to see all these folks, see all these bikes in our parking lot. Well, that was 20 years ago. They're all driving SUVs and like soccer vans now. It's so funny. There was 3 motorcycles and all these SUVs and vans and stuff. It just cracked me up and stuff. But there was a great worship night here, and it was really cool to be able to come in and hear, because everybody had a story that they wanted to share. And one of the stories that really touched me was there was a woman and her husband here, and they met here when they were in the youth group. And I thought that was so cool, because now they're married. It's 20 years later, they've got kids, and to come back and be able to worship together, and they're still doing ministry in the area. And it was really exciting to see that sometimes we forget, but we move in and out of different areas and different places at times, and it's really cool to see people's faith and the journey they've gone through. And so it was a really, really cool time. It was a real neat blessing. We were here late, but other than that, it was really good. So I really enjoyed that very much. I also enjoyed this week, and I didn't bring my Bible up with me, but if you've been following along with the Year of the Bible readings with us, it was a great week. We were hot and heavy in the book of John, and some of the greatest chapters of John, like John 14, and we were finishing up 1 Samuel and getting to 2 Samuel, and watching as David rose up to be the king of Israel, and it was a lot of exciting stories, and it was really good stuff, and there's a lot to highlight for us. There's two things that I want to quote that won't be on the screen that I just want to highlight from this week, and we won't really be talking about them so much, but they apply to us so much as a church overall. The first is this, both of them from John chapter 15. John chapter 15 verses 12 through 13 say this: "This is my commandment, love each other in the same way I loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." Then John 15:17, Jesus says, "This is my command, love each other." And these are so central to us as a church. And I don't know if you've ever got a chance to watch any of our recorded sermons. We do record all of our sermons here via camcorder, and then we post them up on our YouTube channel. But you'll notice that everything we print, everything we say, everything that's like bulletin-wise says loving God and loving people. And we didn't just make this up. This is what Jesus says. He says, you're coming to me, you're showing love to me. Now go love one another. And that's what we're called to do. And those two passages, especially that one today where he says, love each other in the same way I loved you. There's no greater command than to lay down one's life for one's friends. It's Memorial Day weekend. And this is a weekend where we are supposed to remember and celebrate those who went before us, who gave up their life so that we can freely worship in this country. Now, I'll be honest and have a confession. Oh, now some of you are thinking, oh, he hasn't been honest up till this point. No, really, I've been honest the whole time. But very transparent, my generation, and I think especially the generation after me, what we call the millennials, we don't get Memorial Day. And I'll tell you a little bit why. It's because we haven't had a brother or sister or mother or father who died in action somewhere. And there hasn't been any great intensive conflicts. There's been a lot of little wars and continuous long wars, but for the most part, most of us don't have a direct tie-in. So when people hear Memorial Day, the first thing they think of is 3-day weekend. Second thing they think of is barbecuing and doing stuff with friends and going off some places and stuff. And we miss the whole point of why we have a Memorial Day, why there's actually a national holiday. It's to celebrate and remember those who lost their lives. And so it's very interesting that we find ourselves in the middle of the book of John where Jesus says that there is, and he says it this way, that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. So for those of you who have had relatives or friends or brothers and sisters that you lost, I just like to say that I really feel feel for you, and an apology from those that are my age and younger for not understanding better. And I hope you can forgive us for that. So I hope that you will be able to celebrate them this weekend. I hope all of us will be able to celebrate this Memorial Day weekend. And for some of you, you're still trying to make your decisions on what you're going to do this weekend and what's going to happen Monday if I don't have to go to work. And I'm very thankful that I don't have to make any decisions. Chelsea made decisions. We're going to Pastor. We're going to hang out at her parents' house. They're cooking. We're fishing. They're doing everything. I don't have to make any decisions. And it's fantastic because I don't really like making decisions that much. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited this year to be going through Year of the Bible. I don't have to plan out months in advance what I'm going to talk about. I just have to read every week, see what God brings to the surface, and preach on that. It's a wonderful thing. It's really easy for me. So thank you for letting me do that for you. So it is really exciting to me to do that this year because I don't have to plan out way in advance because I don't like making a lot of decisions. You get in those kind of questions of like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Well, what do you want to do? What do you do? You know, and this kind of thing and stuff. I don't like making decisions so much. And I noticed that this week as we're going through the reading that there's a lot of decision making going on. There's a lot of decision making as David's trying to decide what to do and King Saul is on his way out and Jesus is teaching the disciples and there's so many decisions being made. And throughout it, I think there's a common theme for us about decision making. And I'll say it like this, and it's something that I'm calling, if you want to fill in the blank on your thing, the best decision making process. The best. And I put it in quotations because I'm sure people will want to argue with this, and if I put in quotations, then it's just my viewpoint and not an absolute, this is how it is, and we can argue about it all we want. But the best decision making process comes through in all the readings we did this week. And so if you're looking at a process always has steps. A process always has steps. You always have to take steps to accomplish a process. So the first step I think we see, and what I'm calling the best decision-making process is this. We need to seek God. If we want to take a step in the best decision-making process, number one thing is we need to seek God. And like I said, we were in mostly 1 Samuel and trickling into 2 Samuel this week, but we were watching the plight of David. And as we began our reading this week, David was in a really strange spot. He had done nothing wrong his whole life that we know of. All he had ever done was follow God with everything he had. He had served him. He had served King Saul. And yet he was ostracized and kind of pushed out from the Israel nation because King Saul had really lost it. And so when we meet David again this week, we find that he's actually on the other side of the enemy lines. Because the Israelite army is lining up to fight and the Philistine army is lining up against them. And David is at the back of the Philistine army kind of supporting them. But there's a problem. All these Philistine leaders who are about to attack and trying to kill the Israelites look around behind him and go, wait a second, that guy used to be with them and we've heard his name. They sing songs about him. This is a problem. We can't have him behind him. And so they get together and they talk to this guy named King Achish or Ashish. I'm not sure how you say it. And they say, hey, look, that's your boy over there, David, hanging out with you. He's got to go. He might turn in the middle of the battle. We can't have this. And so David, who has an alliance with this King Achish, he gets this conversation and says, hey, you can't be here with us. I'm sorry. The other army commanders say you can't be here. They're worried about you, even though you've done nothing wrong, and I can vouch for you. It's not good enough. So King David says, okay, tells his men, we got to go. So they go back home. And when they go back home, they find out that while they've been gone, their whole town has been ransacked, and everything's been stolen and looted, and everyone's gone, including David's wives. And this is a big deal. And really, you'd think to yourself, what would you do? Like, we know this is David the army commander. Like, is he just going to run out and get him? His first response is what I'm calling the first step in this decision-making process. He seeks God. Let's read in 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 6. This is David's response when finding out that his wives are gone, all the children are gone, everything's gone. This is what it says. David was now in great danger because all his men were very bitter about losing their sons and daughters, and they began to talk of stoning him. But David found strength in the Lord his God. And if you look at that, David found strength in the Lord his God. He's got this moment where he shows up, he's leading this men, they're trusting him, and everything they've got is gone. And they start to kind of turn on him, say, man, our wives, our kids are gone, our whole town is gone, we've been following you, this is terrible, and we don't think you should be the leader anymore. And when it says they're going to stone him, they're not going to get him high with marijuana people, they're going to destroy him with big rocks, okay? I know I say that a lot, but it's a common thing because the terminology is different. We don't stone people anymore. It's against the law, in case you didn't know. If you try and stone somebody, you're going to end up in jail. So they're talking about this. They're saying, we're going to have to stone him. And he goes, okay. And so what does he do? It says he went to the Lord. He was strengthened by the Lord. That means he sought God. Rather than sit there and try and defend himself, say, look, this is why I think we should do this and stuff like that. He goes to God and says, Lord, I need some help right now. And God strengthens him. Strengthens him so he can go out and make good decisions and go out there. And basically, if you want to find strength in God, you got to seek God first. You can't just be walking around expecting that all of a sudden God's going to go, bam, here's the steroid injection right here. It comes from going before him, getting down on your knees and saying, Lord, I've got this issue and I need some help. And that's when God will come and strengthen us. You have to pour yourself out and fill up with him, I think. And I think that's what David did. And this is not a one-time event in David's life. Because as we follow his journey and we watch all the different stories of what happened with him, he was in constant communication with God. This wasn't like an aberrant behavior where one day he was like, I'm in such bad shape, I better consult God. No, he was constantly in communication with God. That's why God later on would call him a man after his own heart. And he's in constant communication because he sought him and he wanted to be in his presence. And, this is not just an Old Testament concept. Sometimes we always want to separate the Old and New Testament because they're two big books, right? You got the Old Testament, it's like these 39 books of all the stuff that happened before Jesus, and then the New Testament with the 27 books of Jesus forward and the first church. And we like to separate those and think, well, that was a concept then. David always would go before God first. Well, that's not just an Old Testament concept. As a matter of fact, it's a very New Testament concept too. And Jesus recommends, if you will, or teaches us. It's in John chapter 15, verse 4. And that was in this week's readings too. So, by the way, if you feel like picking up with the Year of the Bible reading with us, we have the readings out on the table. We have them in the bulletin. You can pick up at any time and read along, and you'll hear about what we're going to talk about in church the next week. John 15, 4, Jesus is speaking to the disciples. This is what he says. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Well, how do we remain in him? Well, you've got to seek him first. If you want to remain in Jesus, you've got to be with him first, which means you have to seek him. And that means taking time to focus on him. That means taking time to read his word. That means doing really what Brian explained to us this morning. I don't know if you caught that. Brian explained how this morning he just got a sense of peace, but he went out this morning early before the other people that he lives with woke up, and he went out and just spent some time praying to God. And he heard some beautiful birds singing. And he knew that God was blessing him with that. But he wouldn't have known that if he didn't take the time to seek Jesus first. See, if we want to make good decisions in our life and have the best decision-making process, if you will, the first step's always got to be to seek God. But you can't stop there. You don't just seek God and then stand in front of him and go, what's up? That's not how I would recommend doing it. I would recommend engaging a little further and taking it to the next level. Step 2, if you will, you've got to receive his counsel. In other words, you've got to listen to what he says and apply it. And picking up with the story from David earlier, so David's at this place and the town's gone. His wives are gone. The kids are gone. Everything's gone. He gets strengthened by the Lord, which is him seeking God. And then he went on to listen and follow God's counsel. And this is what God told him. And this is in 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 7 through 8. So we're jumping back to the Old Testament. We're going to be doing back and forth, Old and New Testament, throughout the rest of our time this morning. But this is what it said. This is what he did next after being strengthened by the Lord. Verses 7 through 8 say this. Then he said to Abiathar the priest, bring me the ephod. Sorry, I always say that wrong. So Abiathar brought it in. Then David asked the Lord, should I chase after this band of raiders? Will I catch them? And the Lord told them, yes, go after them. You will surely recover everything that was taken from you. So David doesn't just go and seek God and get strengthened. He listens to what God has to say. And it's a very honest conversation if you think about it. His wives and family and all the families of everyone around him is gone. And instead of saying, Lord, what is the most direct path to go and get these dudes? He says, should I go after them and should I pursue this course of action? And God says, yes, you certainly should. Go get them and you're going to get everything back. And that's so significant because he could have just gone charging in. I think most of us think that that's what we would do, right? But this is a big decision to make, and he's leading all these hundreds of men behind him who are already pretty mad at him in the first place, right? And he's got to make a good decision, so he seeks God first, but then he listens to what God has to say. Because I believe wholeheartedly that if God had said, no, David, you will be destroyed if you go after them, it's another day, another time, David would have turned to the men and said, we can't. God's not with us right now. And that would be a tough thing to do with all these guys who already want to come after you, to turn around to him and say, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let them go for right now. But he goes to God, and God gives him the instruction. And guess what? They do go on to get back everything and win the battle. And it's incredible. And it's like, it's a spot decision you think you have to make, but instead, nope, takes his time. I'm going to seek God. I'm going to listen to God, whatever he says, and then I'm going to go about this. Well, as we continued on in the reading this week, as we continue to go on through 1 Samuel and into 2 Samuel, we find out that after they win the victory and get everything back, some other things are happening at the same time. Because remember, the Philistines are still in a great battle with the Israelites. And they end up basically winning, and they destroy King Saul and his son Jonathan, who was like David's best friend. And David is still he's not really on the run now, because he doesn't have to worry about King Saul coming after him. And he's already gotten everything back, his wives and all his property and everything like that. And he's at peace with everybody on every front, really. So he's got to figure out what to do next. And so he goes to God with this. And it's in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. It says this, after this, David asked the Lord, should I move back to one of the towns of Judah? Yes, the Lord replied. Then David asked, which town should I go to? To Hebron, the Lord answered. Isn't that significant to you? David says, what neighborhood should I move into? Where should I go? He literally asked that. He says, should I go back now? And God says, yeah. And he goes, what town should I live in? Have you ever thought about asking God where you should live, what town you should live in? Let's pick Marysville over Yuba City. I'm just telling you right now. God will likely bring you here. I'm just telling you. Thank you very much. That's just my personal prayer. For you Yuba City folk out there, I love you. I love you all. I just want you to know, I just love Marysville. So that's because where God told me to live at. I guess that's why I'm kind of swayed that way. But he literally asked God, where should I go and live? And it's almost like he says, well, what address? I mean, what's the latitude and longitude? Where should I be? Should I be in what side of the track should I be on, God? And God goes, why don't you pick Hebron? That sounds good. He told them where to live. He didn't just say, go and find a town. He actually gave them the name of the town. Talk about relying on God and receiving his counsel. I mean, that's just impressive to me that he asked them, should I go and start a war with these guys to get back all of our possessions and our wives and our kids and stuff like that? Yep, do that. Okay, what should I do next? Should I go back to this area? Yeah, do that. What town should I live in? I mean, what a communication that they're having. I mean, talk about decision making to its finest, that just listening to God and receiving the counsel. And so he does that. He follows God, goes back, and then everything starts to really succeed. He becomes King David. They actually crown him. Now he is King David. And he is just rolling. He is just destroying all his enemies left and right wherever God directs him. And he builds a great palace for himself. And then he comes to a point where he goes, you know what? This is not right. I've got all this stuff, and I'm not really respecting God much. I think I should build a temple for God. And we pick it up in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. This is the discussion that happens after he's had this idea. 2 Samuel chapter 7 says this, then when King David was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all the surrounding enemies, the king summoned Nathan the prophet. Look, David said, I am living in a beautiful cedar palace, but the ark of God is out there in a tent. Nathan replied to the king, go ahead and do whatever you have in mind, for the Lord is with you. Now what's interesting is if we stopped right there, and we are going to stop right there because the story gets much longer, but I'm going to paraphrase it for you. So David's like, all right, I'm going to build a temple. Nathan goes home that night. Nathan the prophet, the man of God, who on a spot decision said, do it, David, build that temple. Goes home that night, and God tells Nathan, no, tell him not to build the temple. His son's going to do that. So Nathan has to go back the next day and go, hey, David, I said do whatever he thought. Well, not exactly, because God told me not to do that, because Nathan didn't follow the process. Nathan assumed because he was the leader, he was the lead prophet, that he could answer in a moment's notice, but yet he forgot to seek God and follow God's counsel. But he did. He heard God because he was obviously in close enough communication where God knocked on his door one night and said, hey man, you got to go back and tell him not now. So he did that. And guess what? David didn't build the temple. He continued to do what God directed him to do, and he knew that one of his sons would build the temple later on, and it was Solomon. So Nathan gets corrected. David seeks God's counsel and everything. And I mean, everything. Should I go to war? Where should I live? Should I build a new church? I mean, everything that is a big decision in his life, he comes to God with. Seeks God first, and then he listens to whatever God's counsel and does what God says. You know, it's not just David back in the Old Testament who needed God's counsel to understand things. It's us too. And Jesus made this clear in the book of John to the disciples. In John chapter 14, verse 15, Jesus makes this statement to them. If you love me, obey my commandments. If you love me, obey my commandments. If you want to receive Jesus' counsel, you may not hear his voice always, but he's already kind of told us what he wants us to do.
That's right. That's right.
So if you're sitting there going, well, you know what, I want to seek God and listen, and I want to receive his counsel. And you're like, but I haven't heard his voice. You've heard his voice plenty if you've read his word. And you will be able to make good decisions based upon that. I don't know if he's going to tell you the exact town to live in. He might leave it open to you. You might go to God and say, look, I want to buy a house, and there's these 2 houses that look great. There's this one in Yuba City, and then there's this great one in Marysville. And you might go to God and say, which one? And you may not hear from him. He may not answer because he may leave that decision up to you. But as long as you're following his commandments, and doing people right, loving on God and loving on people, and not cheating to like make it look like you have more finances, and not cheating people out of stuff, and not stealing and robbing, all those things, all the different commandments. You name the commandment. If you're doing all those things, you're doing what he might just leave it up to you to pick whatever. But you've already received his counsel if you've read his word. And if you haven't read his word, start reading it. Start in the New Testament. Don't start in the Old Testament. I'm telling you right now, if you've ever read the Bible, don't start on page 1. If you want to read page 1, that's fine. Then skip to the New Testament. Read all about Jesus. Then go back and fill in the history and understanding of God. It's very difficult if you're first reading the Bible to go all the way through from start to finish. I don't know that anyone's ever done it without perishing. I'm just telling you right now. I'm just telling you, it really gets slow at times when you don't have the whole perspective. But if you start in the New Testament, read the first 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's what we call the 4 Gospels, the good news about Jesus Christ. You will know Jesus' commandments, and you will be able to obey those, and you will be getting his counsel as you go through just doing normal life things. So if you want to make decisions, the best decision-making process, seek God, receive his counsel. After you get that counsel and you do what he's told you, it's what I'm going to call the last step today. And it's this. We need to credit him for his work. Notice it's credit him for his work, not stand up and say, look at me and all that I did. It's not that at all. It's not that at all, because if we go back to that main story that we've been kind of following along where David was in that terrible predicament where he gets kicked out of the army basically and goes back and everything's gone, and he seeks God and God says, go back and get it. He ends up winning and they get back everything and they don't lose a single thing. And what happens next is really awesome. It's David's great example to all the people that he is leading and all the people around him of how we should be trusting in God and then crediting God for the work that God does. So if we go back to the book of Samuel, if we go to 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 22 to 23 or 25, we're going to see what I got here. I have 2 things written down, which is weird because I wrote them down. 22 to 25, I hope, is going to be up on the board. We'll see. It says, so this is after they've already gotten back their wives and children and all their things. This is what it says. Because not everybody went with them, by the way. David split the men. Some people stayed behind because they were too tired to go. The rest of them went. It says here, but some evil troublemakers among David's men said, they didn't go with us, so they can't have any of the plunder we recovered. Give them their wives and children and tell them to be gone. So there's a division in his people. They're saying, hey, what's the deal here? We just won this great victory, and we've got all this stuff. We're not going to share it with those guys that didn't come and fight with us. This is not going to happen. This is David's response. But David said, no, my brothers, don't be selfish with what the Lord has given us. He has kept us safe and helped us defeat the band of raiders that attacked us. Who will listen when you talk like this? We share and share alike. You ever heard that before? Those who go to battle and those who guard the equipment. From then on, David made this decree and regulation for Israel, and it is still followed today. And it's this moment where he goes, we can't be selfish with what? With what we've won? With what we've done? No. With what the Lord has given us, because he helped us and he won the victory for us. David doesn't say it was my great idea to go in there. David doesn't do that at all. He could have. They would have believed him. because he was such a great leader and such a great man, they would have said, yeah, man, we're going to follow you anywhere. You have the best ideas. He goes, no. When I win, it's because of him. When I lose, it's because of me. Yeah. And that's tough sometimes. Because when we win, don't you want to sometimes, say, look at what I did. Look at this great thing that I did. It's not what you did. It's what God did through you, which is cool. And so that's what David does. He says, you know what, guys? We need to give credit where credit is due. And this is the scoop. The win was the Lord's. It wasn't ours. It wasn't mine. And David credits God with it. And, we want to feel like we're responsible for things. We want to look around and say, I did this great thing, or I made this great thing, or whatever the case may be. But the reality is that God was doing it through him. There's a psalm people read from all the time when they start off prayers sometimes. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. It's Psalm 118. It was in our reading this week. If we go to Psalm 118, verses 23 through 24, it's two beautiful verses. It says this: "This is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful to see. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." Think about that. Because when you go outside and you look at wherever you live at, maybe you've done some work there. Maybe you mowed the lawn. Maybe you edged it up real nice. Maybe you planted the flowers. Maybe you washed the car. Maybe you did all these things, and so it looks nice, right? But you didn't make the day. You didn't make those wonderful things God did. God made those. And that's why we say this is the day that the Lord has made. May 27, 2018, this is the day that the Lord has made, and we will rejoice and be glad in it because he made it. We'll give credit where credit's due. God does the work. There are some things that he does through us, and we can take responsibility for a little baby. I mean, look at Sam and Tyler. Everyone's going to look at them and go, oh man, oh, it's so adorable. You guys did so good. They didn't do nothing. Well, they did something. But they didn't put Olive together like that, right? The same thing for all the babies. Eva Bell in here, and I think Mia's down we got all these babies running around. It's wonderful. We need to give credit to God. Look what God did. Look what he did. Let's credit him for the work that he's doing. And it's his work, not ours. Jesus explains this to the disciples too. If we jump back into the New Testament, if we go up to John chapter 15, verse 5. Just before this, I read from this before about how if you remain in Jesus, he'll remain in you. Well, the next thing he said was this: "Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit." Sounds great. We're going to do great things, right? "For apart from me, you can do nothing." Whoa! Nothing. Kind of hurts. Makes you think, well, what good am I? You're plenty good. God created you. He wanted you. He wants to use you. He wants to work through you. But apart from him, you can't do nothing.
That's right.
And sometimes it's like, whoa, man. Well, I guess I'm not worth much. No, that's not true. He never said that at all. He wants you to remain in him. He wants to remain in you and do things. And he says you will bear fruit and do some great things. I have, it's been a really good year for us when you look at fruit. And this is like, okay, some behind the scenes pastoral stuff. You don't hear this from the front a lot of times, right? But we record numbers, right? We keep track of everything to do like that. We keep track of attendance. We keep track of people who make a decision for Christ. We keep track of how many people get baptized. In the last 12 months, we've baptized 15 people.
Praise the Lord.
And it is really cool. And praise the Lord is the right response. It's not what we did up here. God has been drawing people, but we have been fulfilling our role of sharing who Jesus is and worshiping him and pointing people in the direction and reading his word and doing all the things that Jesus said, if you love me, obey my commandments. And guess what? Fruit is happening. And it's beautiful. It's awesome and exciting. But there's no point for us standing up front and saying, look what we did. No, it's the work is his.
That's right.
Because if we weren't with him doing the work that he's asked us to do, there would be nothing. But it's not the case. There's fruit being born. My old church, Spring Valley Church in Rockland, they're doing 8 baptisms today. 6 or 7 are youth from their youth group that either made decisions or are stepping up for Christ. A lot of them through a recent missions trip to Mexico. And one of the stories that was shared with me came from my nephew. Now, my nephew he has faith in Jesus, but you might not ever know it unless you poke him until you keep asking him, because he will sit there in church and just stare. He just chills. He'll plays drums wonderfully. He is not very expressive in his faith. But this year, before going to Mexico, and he's been to Mexico like 10 times, he was going, and he invites friends sometimes, but he came to the youth pastor who took over there after we left, and he said, hey, I know we already had our first Mexico meeting, and no one's supposed to be able to come on after the first meeting because it's a big sense of team. You guys start together, you finish together, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. He says, I know we had our first meeting, but I think my friend needs to go to Mexico this year. That's all he said. I think my friend needs to go to Mexico this year. And so he said, can I ask him if he wants to go? And so the youth pastor said, normally we can't. We already had a first meeting, but you know what? Go ahead and do it. Ask him. We'll get him in. We'll make it happen. So even though this one friend, he had been asking for about 6 years now, somewhere in that range, to come to Mexico, the kid had always brushed him off. He decided to give it one more go because he really felt like God put on his heart that kid needed to go. So he said, hey, you want to go to Mexico? And the kid goes, I would love to go to Mexico. And he's thinking, why the last 6 years you brushed me off? And he's thinking in a teenager's mentality, why? Okay, I don't get this. But so the kid goes, and years ago he made a decision to follow Christ, but then he stopped going to church. There were some big problems in his family. His whole household fell apart. He stopped going to church. He stopped even caring about Jesus. He goes down to Mexico, and it's rekindled in his life. And he understands, again, who Jesus is, and he wants to model his life after Jesus. And so when he came back, he said, I want to get baptized. I made a decision years ago. I didn't follow through on it, but now I want to, and I want to step up and get baptized so people can see I've made this decision. And he's one of the kids getting baptized. It rewinds back to the youth pastor saying, yeah, we're going to make this thing happen. It rewinds back to my nephew, who's very stoic and not very expressive, and he's certainly not an evangelist. God put on his heart, that kid's got to go. See, that's God's work in their lives. And as they were making that decision together and moving forward, there was this communion with God. I mean, for my nephew, he prayed about it first. Even though he doesn't tell anyone he prays, he really does. And he knew that God put on his heart. And so he went to the youth pastor who made a pretty good spot decision, although he wrestled with it, but I think he was listening to God. But it was all God's work the whole time. But these two remaining with Jesus and him remaining in them has brought this fruit to light to where another young man is going to go out and hopefully live the rest of his life for Christ. But they didn't do it. The two there, the youth pastor and the nephew, they didn't do the work. God did the work, but they played their part. Hey, we've got to play our part and then credit him for the work that he's doing. It's not us. We can't sit up here and tout ourselves. I told you that I don't really like making decisions a lot. I hate having to make big decisions and stuff and deal with all that sometimes, but if I don't have to. But the truth is we have to make decisions every day. And as lead pastor, you have to make decisions every day too. And, there's that cool song, I don't know if you ever heard it before, it's like, Jesus, take the wheel. Don't ever do that, okay? I'm just saying right now. If you're driving down the freeway, I would not recommend taking your hands off the wheel and say, Jesus, take the wheel. It's not a very good idea. You might say, Jesus, help my arms out to steer this, 32-passenger bus going down the road. I don't know what it is that you're driving, but we can't just say, look, I'm going to come before God, you do it all. We have to make decisions in our life. So let's use a process that makes sense with God. Let's seek him first in the decision. Say, God, before I go about making any big decision here, I want to just spend time with you. I want to make sure I'm hearing you. I want to be in your presence. But in addition to that, when we're in there spending time with the presence of God, however we do that, whether it's your morning prayer time, you're reading the Bible, you're doing whatever, you're singing your praise songs, how is it you're spending time seeking God? Let's listen for his counsel. The go ahead and do that thing. The go ahead and don't do that thing. And when something amazing happens, let's not say, look at what we did. Let's say, let's look at what he did. Can I pray for you and your week as you get to go out and make great decisions for Jesus and myself as well? Lord, I thank you so much for this place, for this country, Lord, where you have given us the ability to worship you freely. That we can pick out any time on a Saturday, Sunday, whatever time of the week, Lord, and we can come before you and worship you and look at your word. Lord, I thank you for all those who have given their life for the ability for us to do that here in this country. It's an incredible blessing, Lord, that many around the world are not able to do. Lord, I ask you would bless those that are hurting and grieving this weekend as they remember lost ones. And I ask you to bless us all in our decision-making this week as we go forward to continue to love on you and share you with this community and love them as well. Lord, will you help us in all the decisions we make so that we can credit you in the end and we can rejoice with you as well. Thank you for your words and thank you for who you are, Jesus. Amen. God bless you. Have a great week. Hope to see you for Thursday morning prayer if you can make it.